Well, welcome everyone to this year's ABC conference, and thank you, Dr. Fung, for being here. Yeah, does everybody know where she is right now? Probably not. She's joining us all the way from Hong Kong, around the world. So it's almost midnight here.
Midnight, yeah,
Yeah,
midnight.
almost midnight. Thank you for being here, Dr. Fung, and glad you can make it. Yeah, we are very honored to have you present a biblical view of economics today. Um, we um, we don't hear a topic on this very often, so we're excited. Um, the presentation will be in English, but I'm allowed to introduce her in Chinese. So here it goes. Um, Dr. Winnie Fang 冯运儿博士是一位发展经济学家，现在他担任思达经济的总干事。这之前他担任过美国惠登大学副教授和香港恩光书院的教务长。冯博士拥有哈佛大学商业经济博士和惠登大学圣经研究硕士的学位。他的研究包括粮食安全和饥荒、小农耕作和农业政策，以及反人口贩卖。他也热衷于扶贫，推动和参与以信仰为本的整全使命、人道救援与社区发展，已经长达15年多。冯博士致力于不同国家和地区的研究工作，包括就中国的饥荒、印度的匿疾控制、南亚反人口贩卖施工和营商宣教进行很多的研究，并发表学术论文。他也曾前往尼加拉瓜、秘鲁、柬埔寨、菲律宾等国家，督导有关微型金融、公平贸易、粮食安全和性别暴力等议题的项目。Well, we're very fortunate to have her to be able to hear from an expert with this extensive research and field experiences. Before Dr. Fang's presentation, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to have Dr. Fun here to hear her share how to apply biblical principles to the field of economics, and especially how we understand and feel God's heart and compassion for the poor. We just pray that your Holy Spirit would guide her sharing and our listening. Let this session glorify you in every way. Thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Just a reminder, we will have a 10-minute Q&A session at the end. So please hold on to your questions. You can also type them in the chat box below, either in Chinese or in English. Right. Now, Dr. Fan.
Thank you so much, Lynn, for the kind introduction. And I'm so glad to be here. And thank you, everyone, for joining this session because I realize most of the other sessions are in Chinese, but my 普通话不太好. So thank you for allowing me to share in English. So let me share my screen first. So today I hope to share a little bit about a biblical view of economics, both from the individual micro aspect and the societal macro aspect. As I go along, please, if you have any questions, feel free to type in the chat box, and we'll also have some Q&A time at the end. So the world that we are facing in 2025, I think most of us are living in this space now. We see globally there's slower economic growth, higher unemployment, lower income levels. Globally, there's greater inequality and increasing poverty levels around the world, both within countries and between countries. Because of the trade war, tariff war, there are higher trade costs, higher inflation, and higher cost of living. And we also see the greater use of AI and technological growth. And it's been estimated that 40% of jobs around the world would be affected. And there will be job displacements, and there might be higher unemployment in certain sectors of the world. And with the aging population, there would be increased fiscal pressures on different governments to provide for the elderly in the society. And we also see a larger incidence of wars, geopolitical conflicts, and natural disasters stemming from extreme weather events due to climate change. And all these have brought greater economic uncertainty and instability. And we have been told that we are living in a poly-crisis and perma-crisis world right now. So as we live in such an environment, we want to understand, does the Bible give us a framework for us to actually interpret and understand the world that we are in right now and how we are to act? Today, we're going to look at this question from an economic viewpoint. I'll first focus on talking about economics at the individual micro level, which has mostly to do with decision making, and then talk about economics at the societal or macro level, and with a focus on economic justice. So economics at the individual micro level. When I used to teach economics at the undergraduate level, and one of the Econ 101 multiple choice questions in the first day of class would be, what is economics about? Okay, and one of the answer is A, money. And that is definitely not the right answer. Economics is not about money. Ultimately, economics is about decision making. Why do we say that? So everyone faces limited resources. We call it scarce resources, but we also face unlimited wants and desires. So with limited resources, but unlimited wants and desires, we have to make a choice. And economics give us a framework to understand how we make choices in life. And this pertains to both individuals, businesses, governments, countries, etc. For individuals, when we are a consumer, we have to make choices about what to buy, how to spend our time, what career we want to pursue, whether we want to go for further graduate studies, etc. For businesses and companies, they need to decide what to produce, where to invest. And for governments, they need to decide what kind of government policies, what kind of taxes, what kind of economic systems that they want to implement. And behind all these choices in life, the underlying bedrock are incentives and values. So when we think about economics, we're actually thinking about what are the incentives and values driving our behavior. So the first is money as incentives. As human beings, we notice that our actions and decisions are driven by both monetary and non-monetary incentives. But in real life, money is a very powerful incentive, a monetary incentive, influencing behavior. In the Bible, Matthew 6:21, it says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." As an economist, I find this to be very true in real life. Let me give some examples. For example, the government puts a tax on different kinds of goods, for example, cigarettes. And this is because when you increase the price of a good, you provide a negative incentive for people to buy and consume the good. And that's what tax on undesirable goods and products is for. There's also tax-deductible receipts for donations, and that's a positive incentive because you want to encourage people to donate more and to give more. And if you donate more and give more, that donation is tax-deductible. Companies give out year-end bonus as a positive incentive for people to work harder. So they have performance appraisal at the end of the year, and based on your performance of the year, you would be able to get a bonus or not. And for some of us, I don't know whether you have had New Year resolutions where you decide that, oh, this year I need to exercise more. And as a commitment device to get us to exercise more, a lot of people buy 1-year gym membership at the beginning of the year in January. And you see a lot more people going to the gym in January, and then they slowly die off. And then in February, March, April, etc., there'll be fewer and fewer people going to the gym. But committing to a 1-year gym membership is a way to provide incentive for us to get ourselves to the gym. So all these are ways where people, companies, and governments use monetary incentives to influence behavior. Well, then we might ask the question, is this good or bad? Okay. When we read the verse in Matthew 6:21, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also," This doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, right? It really depends on where you put your treasure. Okay, so if you put your treasure in some place that is worthy, that is worth putting through, and then your heart is there also, then it's good. Okay, but if you put your treasure in something that is not worthy, and where you find your heart there also, then that may not be good. Okay, so whether this is good or bad actually depends not on the fact that money drives behavior. So the fact that money drives behavior could be something that can bring good. It only becomes difficult when incentives and values collide. So we know that no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. This is in Matthew 6:24. Let me give some examples when incentives and values could collide when we do economic decision making. So I'm in Hong Kong. I buy a lot of things from Taobao. I don't know whether in the US you can get shipment from Taobao, but then I think it's similar to Amazon. So sometimes I can actually go to a physical store to buy something, but it's so convenient to just sit at home and have the things shipped to my place. But sometimes I feel guilty too because when I like take off the wrappings and all the packages and all the papers, I feel like this is actually a lot of waste in terms of the packaging, etc. And if I don't ask the things to be delivered to my home, then I don't need all those packaging. So this is how the incentive of convenience and in my consumption behavior might collide with my value of not wanting to waste too much environmental resources. Now, on the commercial side, we also see incentives and values colliding in situations where, for example, doctors are incentivized to prescribe certain medications or treatments by pharmaceutical companies. So they are told that if you prescribe this medication, you might get a bonus. Or if you prescribe certain treatments, the hospital may be able to give you some commission back. But the medications or treatments might not be necessary for the patient, or it might not be the best medication or treatment for the patient. So then that would be distortment of incentives there. Another way is where salespersons can earn commissions from sales, and that again will lead to distorted incentives if the things that you're selling or trying to get people to buy may not actually be the best for that consumer. So when we notice all these things happening in our daily life, I think it's important for us to be aware that the way we are brought up, the capitalist and the market economy that we are in, really condition us to always want more money, whether we want to earn more money or save more money or be able to retain, keep more money. There's always this more money incentives at the back of our mind when we make decisions. Again, this may not be necessarily good or bad. It's not as simple as black or white, right? But we just need to be really spiritually aware of this incentive. So say, for example, back to the example of where we have tax-deductible receipts, churches can encourage brothers and sisters to donate to charitable causes. And of course, the tax deduction is an incentive to do so. But if you donate just for the purpose of getting tax deduction, then that itself may not be the best way to motivate someone to donate. So we just need to understand that all our actions and decisions are driven by incentives, and it's always a mix of incentives behind. And the second is thinking about money as a measure of value. And this is something that we often see in our economic environment as well. Money as a measure of self-worth and self-value. This is most prominent in the way we earn wages. Depending on what work you do, wages is given or is fixed or is set as a measure of your ability and performance in your job. It's as a measure of how you are valued by your company. And oftentimes people would use how much they earn or what job they are able to get or what kind of industry occupation they are in as a measure of their self-worth and self-value. And of course, this is not something that is biblical, but it's something that's very ingrained in our societal life. Another example would be the idiom keeping up with the Joneses. That's an idiom saying that a lot of people actually cares about how we fare compared with our neighbors and our peers. So keeping up with the Joneses means that if we see our neighbor having a big house, then we also want a big house in order to prove certain worth or self-value. If we see our neighbor driving a big car, then we may also want that big car. Okay. Similarly, if we see people wearing brand name bags or brand name shoes, we might also be tempted to want those as well. In economics, we call those conspicuous consumption. It's conspicuous in the sense that you carry that brand name handbag or you drive that brand name car as a way to showcase your worth and value. A third example is where we measure a human life by money. We call it a value of a statistical life. So right now in economics, we typically set the value of one human life to be about 1 million to 10 million US dollars. So when I first teach this concept to my students, I think people were shocked that we can actually place a dollar value on human life. But if you think about how insurance works, like if you get into a car accident and if you lose an arm or you lose a leg or you lose an eye, well, the insurance company have to pay you something, right? So they have to put a monetary value on your leg or your arm or your eye. Similarly, if you got into an accident and you lost your life, then again, the insurance company have to place a value on your life and provide you back some damage or payment. So by definition, the way our world works, we do place monetary value on people's lives. But the problem is that this monetary value we place on people's lives actually differs by ethnicity and differs by age group, and sometimes it differs by other physical characteristics. So in the US, white people have a higher value of statistical life than Black people. Younger people have a higher VSL than older people. People who are not disabled have a higher VSL than people with physical or mental disabilities. And all these reflect the way society values an individual. We value whites more than Blacks. We value younger people more than elderly people. We value people without disabilities over people with disabilities. So we place monetary value on someone's worth. But this is entirely not biblical. In the Bible, we are told that our value rests not on who we are, what we do, or what we have. So it's not about what we can produce on our job, how we perform, what our ability is. And it's not about what we own, what we consume, whether we live in a large house, drive a big car, or what. But our value rests on whose we are. And this whose we know is God's. Every one of us are created by God, and we belong to God, and our value rests on the fact that we are loved and created by him. In Genesis 1:26-7, we know that God created humankind in his own image, and this applies to every individual. So every single individual is valuable and has intrinsic value because of who God is and how we are created by him. In 1 Samuel 16, the Lord says, the Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance. So we look at people's race, we look at people's age, we look at people's ability to work, ability to perform. But the Lord looks at the heart. And in John 15:15, Jesus says, I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. God actually values us not as servants, not as a tool for production for a company, but God values us as friends. And if God values us in this way, how much more must we do the same to our fellow brothers and sisters and to our fellow neighbors and to our fellow humankind in our society? So when we say our value rests only on whose we are, we need to remind ourselves that That is true also for our enemies or those who look different, who may be different from us. We should treat others the same. Money as a measure of values is also seen in our economic system. Our economic system values efficiency and productivity. Okay, we might see oftentimes these words showing up in our work performance or appraisal forms, etc. In our society, we always demand cheaper, faster, better. So when I was in business school, our business professor told us that if you want to have a startup or if you want to own a profitable business, you must do two out of these three things. You must be either cheaper, faster, or better than all your competitors. And this is something that we demand as consumers, but it is also something that we demand from companies as producers as well. Companies demand workers to be cheaper, but to work faster and to work better. This becomes a problem when it is the only measure of success in society. Often it will lead to overwork and burnout. There will be feelings of never good enough. And this is true especially with technology, with AI and with the internet and with the way we are using and living in a technological world. We would never, ever be fast enough or good enough. And under this kind of environment, people are conditioned to treat ourselves and treat others as machines. We are merely tools. Everything is about utility and functionality. Okay, can I produce more and can I produce them faster and better? But again, this is not the way the Bible sees us. I prefer using the word fruitfulness rather than efficiency or productivity or effectiveness. The Bible doesn't ask us to always go for efficiency and productivity or effectiveness. Instead, the Bible asks us to be fruitful. And the way we define fruitful is quite different from the way society defines it. In John 15:5, Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So it has nothing to do with whether we study more, whether we work more, whether we are able to produce more. It only has to do whether we abide in Jesus and allow him to abide in us. We ourselves can do nothing. So we can only be fruitful because of who God is. And in 1 Corinthians 1:27, Paul says, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. And this is very clear that the Bible is always countercultural. When the culture requires us to be strong, to be wise, to be effective, to be efficient, to be productive, God says, no, I choose the foolish things of the world. I choose the weak things of the world. Even Jesus dying on the cross is the most inefficient, ineffective thing to do. But Jesus' death brought about resurrection and brought about God's redemptive plan in human society. So God chose the foolish things, the weak things, to shame the wise and the strong. And the biblical view of fruitfulness also has to do with the way we think about our role. We are not owners or producers, but we are stewards. Everything that we own, everything that we have comes from God and God only. This is shown in Genesis 1 and 2, where God gives mankind the creation mandate to actually steward resources well. And this is a very different kind of concept when we think about how society always tells us the mindset of, I earned this, I own this, I deserve this. This is not how the Bible talks about the kind of material possessions or the kind of production that we do. That the Bible never tells us to have this kind of mindset of, I earned this, I owned this, I did this, or I deserve this. Everything belongs to God. And we are stewards and we are able to enjoy the fruits of his labor and his work when we abide in him. So when we think about money as incentives and money as a measure of value, we can pay attention to the way we make life choices and lifestyle choices. Timothy Keller, in his book Counterfeit Gods, The Empty Promises of Money, Sex, and Power, and the Only Hope That Matters, talks about how we live in a capitalist economy. And in this kind of economy, money, prestige, and power are interconnected. Oftentimes, when you have more money, it can buy you more power and more prestige. And if you have more prestige and more social capital, it can also give you more power and in turn allows you to earn more money. So these three things are interconnected and often reinforce one another. And society encourages us to go after these things, to pursue these things. And Timothy Keller calls these counterfeit gods. Basically, they are idols. And this is what Matthew 6:19 says. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. When we pursue money, prestige, and power, these are just empty promises. These are pure treasures on earth where moths and vermin can destroy and where thieves can break in and steal. Instead, the Bible tells us that our treasure is based in loving God and loving neighbor. That's the great commandment that Jesus gave us in Matthew and Mark. Loving God and loving neighbor goes hand in hand. So it's not two different commandments, or even a sequential commandments, but they are both sides of the same coin. You cannot love God without loving neighbor, and you cannot love neighbor without loving God. And the Bible espouses on what loving God and loving neighbor means in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. We are asked to cultivate a generosity of spirit and hospitality in lifestyle. We are asked to cultivate compassion towards the poor and marginalized. We are asked to cultivate a simple lifestyle and practice gratitude and contentment. And in Jesus' parables, there are a lot of teachings about sacrificial giving versus hoarding for self. In Mark 12, we have the parable of not the parable, but Jesus points at the action of the widow with the 2 coins versus people who give out of their plenty. The widow gives out of her poverty. So it's a sacrificial giving that is honorable and that is valued in Jesus' eyes. And in Luke 12, Jesus' parable talks about the parable of the rich fool. You can store up money for yourself, but you never know whether you will still have life to enjoy it in the tomorrow. So all these would be how the Bible thinks about how we make life choices and lifestyle choices. So that's a quick discussion about a biblical view from the individual micro level. And now maybe we can move on to the societal and macro level. And I'll focus on talking about the pursuit of economic justice that is talked about in the Bible. And when I say economic justice, one way to think about it is to think about both economic poverty and economic inequality. And when we step back and think and see God's intention for his creation, I love what Jesus says in John 10:10. Jesus said, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. This fullness of life is what God intends for all his creation. And this fullness of life is a kind of flourishing that is holistic. It encompasses spiritual, mental, social, physical, and economic well-being. So it's not just the spiritual well-being of I believe in God and then I have personal salvation and that's it. God actually cares about our mental, social, physical, and economic well-being in the life here and now. And we see that when Jesus first started his ministry on earth. In Luke 4, that's after Jesus went through the 40 days of temptation in the desert, Jesus gave an inauguration speech before his ministry. He entered the synagogue, stood up, and read from the book of Isaiah 61. He says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. So this is basically what Jesus said at the very beginning of his ministry. He has come to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So all these things have to do with both physical, social, mental, economic well-being. To proclaim good news to the poor, freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. And as we read along the Bible, we would see that poverty, which leads to premature death and a less than full and abundant life, is clearly not in God's will for humankind. So God's intention for his creation is that we may have life and have it to the full. This is a full flourishing for both humankind and for his creation. And when we think about poverty, it is the exact opposite of flourishing. It actually is a kind of death, a kind of premature death. And this is very true practically because when you look at countries that suffer from poverty, high poverty rates, those are countries that have very high infant and maternal mortality and have very low life expectancy and have a lot of preventable deaths from infectious diseases. And in countries and places with poverty, we also see people suffering from poor human dignity, very poor nutrition and poor sanitation environment, and suffering from a less than full and abundant life. So just to show some pictures, I have 3 pictures, each from a high, middle, and low income country. These are taken from almost 10 years ago, but I really like them because it's taken by a journalist who went to different countries around the world, and the journalist paid families to bring all their belongings out of their house in order for the journalist to take a picture. So in this picture, you see, this is taken in the UK. The family has brought all their belongings out of the house. So you can see this family has a boat, a TV, a car, bicycle, washing machine, dishwasher, table, etc., etc. So this is very typical of our high-income country. GDP per capita is 35,000 US dollars. So this is back in the days. So if we look at the GDP per capita of US or UK nowadays, it's almost closer to 70 to $80,000. Life expectancy is 79 years back then, and adult literacy rate is 99%. Then we go to a middle income country. This is in Mexico. And again, you can see that this family has brought all their belongings out of their house for this picture. So this family doesn't have a boat or a car anymore, but they do have bicycles. They don't have a dryer or a washer, so they are hanging their clothes on the balcony to dry. But this family still have a TV, a sofa, tables, cupboards, etc. Okay. In Mexico at that time, the GDP per capita is only $11,000. Life expectancy is much lower, only 76 years, and the adult literacy rate is 99. And then we go to a low-income country. This is in Tanzania. And you can see this is the kind of poverty that I usually have in mind when I think about the poor. And this is because I actually do a lot of work in poor countries. So I visit a lot of these kind of communities, villages. So in Tanzania, the GDP per capita is only 1,130 US dollars. And by the World Bank standard, this is considered extreme poverty. Okay, so this is almost only $3 a day. And you can see this family, while they do have a bicycle, so if you are living in a poor village and you still have a bicycle, that means you probably may not be the poorest in that village already. Okay. But still, you can see that this family has very little, very few belongings. All their clothes is what they wear. Okay, there might be some extra clothes hanging on the bamboo stakes near the front, but otherwise there's not much that they own. And most of them are some pots and pans that they use for cooking. Not much else there. Life expectancy in low-income countries are much lower. People die early, so this is what we call premature deaths. Life expectancy is only 50 years. Adult literacy rate is very low. It's only 46%. And usually adult literacy rate is a good indicator of other measures of well-being. So with countries with low literacy rate, there will be lower education level, there will be lower levels of nutrition, there will be higher levels of infant and maternal mortality, and higher incidence of infectious diseases. So if we look at some numbers, globally, the definition of extreme poverty by the World Bank is if someone lives below $3 a day. So I think right now, if we go to Starbucks, a cup of coffee is more than $3. So living below $3 a day is almost nothing. You can barely eat with that amount of income. So people living in extreme poverty are malnourished. They do not have access to safe drinking water. They do not have access to reliable electricity. They have little access to education, and they often suffer from much poorer health. Currently, 8.5% of the world's population, that's about 700 million people, are living in such kind of extreme poverty. And there is inequality across continents. In Africa, for example, there is a much higher rate of extreme poverty. The extreme poverty rate is 38%. Now, if we look at the US is considered the richest country in the world. And yet, in this richest country in the world, 12.5% of population, 40 million people live in poverty. And that really is unacceptable. Okay? It boggles the mind how, when you're already in the richest country in the world, how can you still have 40 million people living in poverty? The poverty line in the US right now is defined as if there's one person in the household is about 15,000 US dollars a year. And if you have a family of four, it's about $32,000 a year. So this poverty line means that it takes around this amount of money to actually have basic health, basic education, and basic food enough for basic nutritional needs. The top three poorest states in the US, Louisiana, Mississippi, and New Mexico, and they have over 17% people living in poverty. And we see that the poverty rates are also much higher. That's where the inequality comes in. In female-headed households with no husband present, it's much higher. For young adults without a high school diploma, it's much higher for families whose head of household is unemployed, and it's much higher for ethnic minorities. And we see this, and we call these kind of systematic problems, right? This is not just individual problem, but it's systematic in the sense that systematically there are certain social demographic groups that are suffering from higher poverty rates. So if we look at some graphs, just to show the problem of US inequality, this graph shows the US average income before taxes. On the left-hand side, that is the bottom 20%. Okay, so for the bottom 20%, the average income is about $22,000 a year. But if you look at the right-hand side, the top 1%, the average income is about $3 million a year. And that's 139 times as much as those in the bottom 20%. So then the question is, what are the factors in society, or what is the economic system such that we keep people in the top 1% and we keep people in the bottom 20%? There's very little social mobility actually across these kind of income bins. It's very difficult for someone from the bottom 20% to move into the top 10 or top 1%. Very little social mobility. And one of the factors comes from our economic policies. Okay, so research has shown that tax cuts for the rich are a key factor in the economic divide. In the past 30, 40 years, between 1979 to 2021, the bottom 20% had a cumulative income growth rate of about 132%. But during the same period, the richest 0.01%, which is shown as the brown line on this graph, they had a cumulative income growth rate of 1,003%, and that's 7.6 times those in the bottom 20%. So you can see the bottom 20% is the blue line. Their income has grown. It has grown, but the growth is very little. Okay? The incline is very small. But then for the top 0.01% and the top 1%, there's a sharp growth, especially in recent years. Okay? And the sharp growth in recent years has a lot to do with the tax cuts for the rich. And we see inequality across ethnic groups as well. In figure 3, we see that white and Asian wages are much higher than Black and Latino wages. So this is the median weekly earnings. White employees have a higher weekly earning than Black employees by about 24%. In figure 4 on the right, we see that Black unemployment rates is much higher than other groups. In fact, it's twice as much as the other groups. Okay, so Asian actually we fare well because we have the highest median weekly earnings and we have the lowest monthly unemployment rate. But for the Black and Latino groups, they have the higher unemployment rates. Right now, Black employees in the US have an unemployment rate of about 7.2%, whereas the white employees have only about 3.7%. So then we have to ask ourselves these questions. Why do these kind of inequality exist across racial or ethnic groups? And the same question we bring to the global poverty and inequality situation. So globally, there is a huge concentration of wealth. The world's richest 1.5%, i.e. those with more than $1 million, owned almost 48% of the entire world's wealth. So it's extremely concentrated in the richest 1.5%. And the bottom 40% of the world's population, i.e. people earning less than 10,000, they hold less than 1% of the world's wealth. Huge inequality. And as Christians, what do we say towards this kind of huge inequality? And what can we do in such kind of situations? Like, we are called to act. And we are called to act because this kind of inequality pertains to God's idea of justice. So this is one example of what we call climate justice. The wealthy contribute most to climate change, but suffer the least from the problems of climate change. We see the effects of climate change nowadays. There is extreme weather events, there is drought, there is flooding, there is a lot of extreme natural disasters. But it is usually the poor people who suffer the most from these kind of climate change events. The poorest 50% of the world population is responsible for only 12% of global carbon emissions, but they are exposed to 75% of income losses suffering from climate change, whereas the world's richest 10% accounts for close to half of all emissions, but faces only 3% of relative income losses. Huge inequality here. Okay, so we call this climate injustice. But I'm sorry to say that given the fact that we are living in the US and I'm living in Hong Kong, we are automatically in the world's richest 10%. Okay? So we account for close to half of the entire world's global carbon emissions, but we only suffer 3% of the relative income losses. The 75% of income losses, we dump it on people in other developing countries. So why do I say that we are actually the top 10% in the world? So I really like this website. If you are interested, you can go to this website. It's called givingwhatwecan.org, or you can type "How rich am I" in Google and you can find this. Okay. So if you type "How rich am I," it gives you where you can put in your country and you can put in your yearly household income and you can put in how many adults and children in your household. And it will tell you how rich you are compared to the rest of the world. Now, I put in $39,000 for a household of one adult because that's the median income in the US right now. So the median income in the US is $39,000. And if you earn the median income in the US, you are automatically in the top 3% of the world. You are richer than 97% of the entire world's population. You're the richest 3%. And then for this giving what we can, they actually gives a challenge to the people. So they ask, what if you tithe 10%? And we know that as Christians, we are encouraged to tithe 10% of our income. So if we earn the median income of 39,000, and if we tithe 10%, if we are to donate 10% of our income, we still are in the top 3.8% richest in the world. We're still richer than 96.2% of the entire world's population. And if we only donate 10% of our income each year, our donations could fund 571 children will be able to be treated with a full course of medicine for malaria. And this will help prevent malaria deaths in children. Almost 2,000 children will be able to receive vitamin A supplements, and this will help children who are undernourished. And you'll be able to save 0.8 lives. Okay, so this is similar to what I shared earlier on about the value of statistical life. In developing countries, in the US, the value of a statistical life is about $1 million to $10 million. But in a developing country, the value of a statistical life is much lower. So with your donation, which is about only $4,000 a year, you're already able to save 0.8 lives and for a longer and healthier future. As we think about the global poverty and inequality situation, we get connected to God's heart for the poor. Okay? So we asked ourselves the question, how will God feel when he lives in year 2025 now? And if he looks at the world around us and looks at the poverty and inequality around us. We know what God's heart for the poor is. It's very clear in the Bible. In Psalm 68, 5-6, David sings this praise of God. A father to the fatherless, a defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families. He leads out the prisoners with singing, but the rebellious live in a sun-scorched land. And in Luke 1:52-53, that's when Mary sings her song of praise to God. Okay, Mary sings, he has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, but has sent the rich away empty. It is very clear that God's heart for the poor and marginalized is shown in God's compassion. In Exodus 23, God told Moses, who in turn told the Israelites, do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. Do not oppress an alien. You yourselves know how it feels to be aliens because you were aliens in Egypt. And in Isaiah 58, God actually issues this decree. God is talking about how people were hypocrites at that time. They said that they love God and that they fast for God, but God says that is not the kind of fasting that he wants. Okay? Instead, God says, it's not this the kind of fasting I've chosen to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? So this is all very practical, we can see. To share your food with the hungry, to provide the poor wanderer with shelter. When you see the naked, to clothe them and not to turn away from your own flesh and blood. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and vicious talk, and if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness and your light will become like the noonday. It's extremely clear what God's heart for the poor and the naked and the oppressed and the hungry are. And this is what God asks us to do too, as followers of Christ. In Matthew 25, Jesus talks about the sheep and the goats. Okay? He's talking about how the sheep will be distinguished or differentiated from the goats. And one way he talks about that is said, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. So Jesus is saying, when we give something to the poor, whether to eat, to drink, when we invite the stranger in, when we clothe those who are naked, when we look after the sick, when we visit those who are in prison, we are actually doing these unto Jesus. Jesus is so identified with the poor that what we do towards the poor is what we do towards Jesus. So whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. In Micah 6:8, God says, He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. In James 1:27, it is very clear. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. So we are called to care for those who are hungry, to look after the orphans and the widows, and to act justly and love mercy. And how are we to do that? Okay, so one way we actually follow Christ's call to care for the poor is we need to first understand what causes poverty, understanding the complex causes of poverty. In our secular world, our cultural worldviews tells us something about how we think about the question, why are the poor poor? So social scientists have shown this research. So they divide this into individual versus social and blame versus fate. When you ask the question, why are the poor poor in US, okay, most people would say the poor are poor because they are lazy. If you ask the same question in Europe, most people would say the poor are poor because they are unlucky. So in the US, most people attribute poverty to individual blame. The poor are poor because they are lazy, they lack thrift, they do not have good morals. So they gamble their money away, they simply don't work hard, they are jobless, and that's why they are poor. But if you ask the same question to European countries, people would often attribute it to individual fate. The poor are poor because they are unlucky. They got into a natural disaster, their house got burnt down, there is an earthquake, there's a flooding, they were born with certain debilitating illnesses, so they are poor just because they are unlucky. And I think nowadays, we also have what we call social blame and social fate. Under social blame theory, people think that the poor are poor because they are oppressed. They are victims of the actions of others. They are the victims of social injustice. And for social fate, it means that people think that the poor are poor because they are victims of uncontrollable societal and global developments. So one way is to think about the technological growth and the AI growth. So people would say that, well, when we have technological growth, when you see AI developing so rapidly, the entire world would be progressing and there will be larger and faster economic development. But by definition, there would always be someone left behind. So there would always be someone left behind in the technological divide, in the economic divide, in global economic growth. So that's kind of a social fate. That's what the cultural worldview is. But what about the biblical worldview of why the poor are poor? Now, I really like this parable of a poor person in the Bible, and I believe this is a parable that most of us or all of us are very familiar with. Okay, so this is in Luke 15. This is the parable of the lost son. So if you remember, the son got the money from his father and then went off. And then in Luke 15:13, it says, not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And you can continue reading on. Now, usually when we ask people in developed country, why is the young son poor? Most people would say, well, of course, the younger son squandered his property in reckless living. But if we ask the same question in developing countries, it's very interesting that most people would give a different answer. So they would say the younger son is poor because there is a severe famine. So people in rich countries would focus on the fact that the younger son squandered his property, whereas people in developing countries would usually focus on the fact that, well, there is a natural disaster, there is a famine. And also, they would focus on the fact that when the younger son was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, no one gave him anything. What does that mean? Well, that really means that the younger son faces economic oppression. So clearly, the younger son is trying to earn a living by hiring himself out and being sent into the field to feed pigs. So he's actually doing a job, he's working to earn a livelihood, but he didn't even get a living wage. So he is oppressed economically. Well, the point of Jesus' parable in Luke 15 is not to demonstrate the complex causes of poverty. The point of this parable of the lost son is really to demonstrate the generosity and the hospitality and the compassion and the mercy of the Father. But I like this parable because it reminds me of the way how the poverty of this younger son is due to several factors. Poverty comes from fallen people. There's individual sin. So this son squandered his property in reckless living. Poverty is due to a fallen creation. We live in a fallen created world where there are natural disasters. In this case, there is a severe famine. And poverty comes from the fact that we are living in a fallen world. There are structural sins in society. And most of the structural sin comes from our social political systems and come from the way we organize our society. And in this case, for the case of the younger son, it comes from the way wages are set. And he didn't get a living wage. And no one around him actually provides for him. Neighbors definitely see him, like his employer definitely see his need, but no one gave him any. So in a biblical sense, we can understand poverty as the result of the fall. And because of the fall, there is the reality of a broken creation. There is the reality of our sin. There is the reality of the sin of others. And there is the reality of the direct work of the enemy. And as a consequence, it results in broken relationships with self, with others, with creation, and with God. Brian Myers in the book Walking with the Poor says, the nature of poverty is fundamentally relational. It's really not about physical deprivation. Well, of course, you do not have enough food and shelter, but ultimately it's relational. You suffer from a distorted, broken relationship with God, with creation, with yourself, and with others. And the underlying cause of this poverty is fundamentally spiritual. It's the result of the fall. And all of us are under this curse. And what are the implications when we think about poverty as a result of the fall? Gustavo Gutierrez in A Theology of Liberation says this. Gustavo Gutierrez says, God has a preferential option for the poor. God has a particular compassion and heart for the poor. The poor deserve preference not because they are morally or religiously better than others, but because God is God, in whose eyes the last are first. This statement clashes with our narrow understanding of justice. This very preference reminds us, therefore, that God's ways are not ours. So we care about the poor not because they are morally better, not because they are religiously better. Oftentimes, the poor are sinners just as we are. The poor also oppressed the other poor people. The poor are also broken and evil individuals, same as the non-poor. But God has a preferential option for the poor because in God's eyes, the last are first. We need to understand the complex causes of poverty and not just blindly helping. If we want to help without hurting, we really need to spend time to understand the complex causes of poverty in a particular community, in a particular household in a particular country before we can understand how best to help. We also need to acknowledge and understand that it is not just individual sin or societal sin that we are dealing with, but that there are principles and powers and principalities at work. In Ephesians 6:12, Paul said, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." So when we think about fighting poverty, we're not just talking about using human methods, coming up with economic policies, coming with societal solutions, getting people a job, etc. There is something deeper than that. We are fighting a spiritual battle. Ultimately, as Christ followers, we are called to participate in God's work of transformation in this world. And the twin goals of transformation, and this is by Brian Myers, it's changed people and just and peaceful relationships. When we participate in God's work of redemption and transformation, we contribute to a world of changed people who are able to discover the true identity as children of God and who are able to recover the true vocation as faithful and productive stewards of gifts from God for the well-being of all, both humankind and creation. And when we say that poverty is a result of the fall and leads to broken relationships, God's work of transformation and redemption will lead to just and peaceful relationships. And this is what we see in the new heavens and new earth, as described in the book of Revelations. Ultimately, we want to be able to enjoy just and peaceful relationships with the triune God, with ourselves, with others, and with creation. And all these things we cannot do by ourselves. This is God's work, but God has invited each one of us to participate in his work. So this is what I have to share today, a little bit about decision making, about the pursuit of economic justice. And if you're interested to learn more, you're most welcome to check us out. Our website is www.cedarfund.org. We do a lot of poverty alleviation and development and relief work around the world in 14 countries, working with the poor communities, working with local churches to bring about transformational development. So I'll end here and take any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fung, for a very eye-opening talk. Yeah, not only informative in helping us understand more about economics, money, income, poverty, injustice, but I think more importantly, inspiring in a way that she urges us to reflect on whose we are and to use God's given resources to help transform lives and live a life of fruitfulness in God's eye. Thank you so much. Yeah. Anyone, if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself or open your camera. I think Keith has a question.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank Dr. Fong for your touching message. It's presenting a very conflicting world views and God's views about economics, about poverty, about inequality. Yeah. And I would like to ask if it's okay for you to share your presentation files so that, I mean, we don't have, I take some note, but maybe missing something. So if you can, I would appreciate.
Yes, not a problem. Let me see if I can I send a file through the chat box?
I'm not sure if through the chat box we can download it or not.
Okay, then maybe I send it to Lynn, and I don't know whether people can email Lynn or email the organizers to get
Okay, I have Lynn's email.
Mhm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you need a copy, and just email me.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really like eye-opening. Actually, I study economics as well, and a lot of time we just indulging in a world view about reality, and now we can see from the God's view. Yeah, what's going on here? Thanks.
Thanks for sharing, Keith.
Other questions or anyone who wants to share? I would strongly recommend checking into the website that Dr. Fung shared. It's very comprehensive, both in English and in Chinese. Lots of information and how to get involved. Yeah, all the pictures, it's pretty comprehensive. So it is a wonderful website. Yeah.
Dr. Van, do you mind to share the QR code again?
Yes.
There's a QR code.
Yes, let me do that. Oh. Actually, it's you can just find us at cedarfund.org.
Cedarfund.org. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, someone is also asking to show the website. So right here on the screen.
So I can share a little bit about what we do. For Cedar Fund, actually, Cedar refers to Christian response to poverty through education. That's the E. D stands for development. A stands for advocacy, and R stands for relief. Our working principle is from church through church. So we do a lot of church and community mobilization because we believe that joining in God's work to do poverty alleviation and to do development is the role of every local believers. So we really want to join hands with local churches and Christian NGOs in developing countries, help them to reach out to their own communities. And right now we are focusing on 3 areas. We do a lot of anti-human trafficking work in Southeast Asia and South Asia, because in poor countries, human trafficking is a big problem. A lot of parents actually have to sell their kids because of poverty. I was in India talking with a family, a mom, she has 6 daughters. She has to sell 1 daughter so that she can marry off the other 5 daughters, because in India, they require a dowry payment. And if in the rural areas, if you do not get married, women cannot survive. Okay? So basically the mother has to sacrifice 1 daughter to make sure that the other 5 daughters can get married and can survive. And then I was in Myanmar not long ago. Myanmar is undergoing war because of the military regime. And a 15-year-old boy I was talking to, he was the middle child of a family of 3. Okay? His family has 3 sons. He's the middle child. His father sold him to be a soldier for $4,000 US. You can see that a human life is worth only $4,000 US. And being a soldier of 15 years old is very dangerous because in Myanmar, there is still a lot of mines in the field, hidden mines. So the younger soldiers are asked to go to the front lines first to test out whether there are mines. So they are the ones who go first and die first. And so the value of a life in poor countries is really very, very low. So a lot of human trafficking going on in poor countries. We also do work with climate justice, especially in places that are suffering from famine, from food insecurity because of the extreme weather events, that are a lot of drought. A lot of animals die. People cannot grow anything to eat. And we also do work with peace and conflicts, especially in conflict regions in the Middle East.
Wonderful. Yeah, we have another question here. How can we help educate our children who are usually very keen on playing games without caring too much about the people or the communities around them?
I would encourage helping them to be exposed to friends and people who are from a different socioeconomic background than they are. For me, it's very, I always tell my students that you cannot love an empty concept. You cannot say, I love the poor when the poor is an empty concept. You can only love a person. So I can only say I love Anna because I've met Anna in India. Okay. I love John because I met John in Myanmar. Okay. You can only love when you get to know a person, and you get to know a person only if you spend time with that person. So I would really encourage families to be able to get the children to explore, spend time, maybe go to short-term mission trips, or just visit neighborhoods, communities, poor communities in your area. Let them have friends who are coming from a different ethnic group or different social economic group. And that's kind of how you have the human connection. And once you have a friend, then you slowly will get to spend time with them, slowly get to know their needs and love them, etc.
That's totally right. I mean, you cannot like educate with empty concept. You have to use like a real life to connect. Yeah. So
That is true. From one person to another.
yeah.
Yeah, on a personal basis. It's good advice. Yeah. I just wanted to highlight one thing that Dr. Fang mentioned in her presentation. My quote may not be exactly accurate. I was trying to write down quickly. The nature of poverty is fundamentally relational, and the cause of poverty is fundamentally spiritual.
True. Yeah.
And it's a very, very succinct summary of what we are facing in today's world. And I think spiritual and relational are related. And then if we follow biblical principles in, helping the poor, walking with the poor to feel God's heart and, compassion for them, I think that's the first step that we can try. But I've never looked at poverty this way, relational and spiritual. So it's very, very eye-opening. Thank you.
Yeah. And I never realized that I'm 98% literate, or I'm like less than 98% of the world population.
Mm-hmm.
Also,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you everyone for participating. Let's give Dr. Fang a round of applause.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Very late in Hong
Mhm.
Kong now. Yeah. So God bless you and have a good night. Yeah.
It's past
Thank you.
midnight. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
It's already.
I hope you have a good night's sleep.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone.
So God
Mhm.
bless. Bye
God
bye.
bless.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.